Hello, and welcome to episode number 25 of Future Tech Chat. This show is hosted by me, Rob Attrell, along with my cousin Mike. I hope you're excited to join us today while we talk about social media during crisis. Today we'll be discussing how networks like Twitter are useful in protests and uprisings, how censorship affects social media and ways around that, and how social networks can help humans share information during emergencies. Nicholas Maddox is also here with us today, and so the balance of power in the show is shifting slowly from Eastern Canada to the West. Some things never change. Thanks for tuning in to Future Chat. Now let's get started.
What's up, Rob?
What's up with you guys?
I'm in the heart of the New West. That's exciting.
How does it feel?
Feels Calgarian. Although I've been benefiting greatly from the rain shadow this week. Like the moist air gets forced up over the mountains, and then it just all rains out before it actually gets to Calgary. And that's been great for my hip. But it's a great day today.
See, most people would have to have mountains explained to them, but Rob is fortunately from the West, so we can bypass that altogether. So.
Well, yes, but there is the issue that people other than you or Rob would listen to this later, and they might need an explanation.
That is also true.
It's kind of sad to think that you have to explain mountains to people.
Just being able to see mountains from where you live, that's kind of the main thing.
What do you mean, like it's sad that they have to be explained to people?
No, some people have never experienced mountains.
Yeah.
Probably true, and it's sad.
It's true.
And it is sad.
Can you see the mountains from Edmonton?
I don't know. I actually never noticed.
I don't think you can.
I don't think you
it's
can,
Not
no.
in the. It doesn't experience Chinooks, so I don't think it's that close.
No.
So far as I know.
Yeah. No, I
But
from what I remember,
Edmonton-
you can't see mountains that far north.
Interesting.
Edmonton, more like Deadmonton, am I right? I know what I'm talking about.
I'm sad this week, you guys.
Why are you sad?
Screen sharing has killed my lower third.
Aww.
Oh man.
I've literally tried everything and I can't get it back.
How are people gonna know who you are?
I know, right?
And what your completely irrelevant hashtag was.
They'll know. I can do this. It'll shift my screen around, but it won't. Anyways, that's beyond irrelevant.
The point is.
It's
Our topic-
topical because we're talking about social media, and this is media in a social sense that isn't working right now.
True.
It is, it's true. This is one of the pitfalls of using social media.
Sometimes you don't get people knowing who you are.
Yeah.
In all honesty,
Your name's probably like Fred or something.
my name is Rob, and I had hashtag future chat underneath the bottom, but it's gone now.
Oh, hey, Rob.
So let's move on to real social media issues, and I want to start
We're actually talking about?
Yeah. I want to start with a caveat today that when we're going to talk about protests and things going on around the world that use social media, we don't intend to comment on the actual protests themselves. We're not necessarily as informed about them, but what we want to talk about is the implications. We're certainly not going to get political, but we want to talk about the implications that the social media networks that are being used and the ways that are being used to communicate, how those affect the protests that are going on.
Right. So we have little to no, or we are going to perform little to no discussion on religious extremism and, oppressive governments, yada, yada, yada.
Exactly. But we do want to comment on how social media is helpful or how it can be detrimental in some cases to those processes. And so I think we should start just talking about, I think the most important thing that's happened in social media to the openness of communication between people, regardless of circumstance, is Twitter, the social network. Just in terms of being able to communicate instantly with anyone around the world, it's hard to put any other network or any other method of communication above Twitter and what it does. So maybe let's talk a bit about if any of us have experiences where Twitter came in handy, like being able to look at Twitter to see what was going on came in handy during some situation. Do you guys have any stories to tell? Because I know I have several that
we have the same one actually. Well, at least one of our stories.
Let's talk about the most recent one right now in Ottawa this past Wednesday.
Oh, that wasn't that's specific to Mike and I.
What do you mean?
What are you talking about? Are you talking about you and I have the same one?
I was saying the flood in Calgary.
Yeah.
Oh, that too. Yeah. So
do you have the same one as all of us? Maybe.
Like that one, it's not the most recent, but that was an instance where we actually had to turn to Twitter in order to find out information because there was so much traffic to the City of Calgary site that it actually crashed and it couldn't handle the bandwidth, but they kept tweeting with a certain hashtag, and that's how a lot of people got their information.
Yeah. Well, let's give a bit of background for the actual event, and I guess we'll start with the Calgary flood since we're talking about it now.
Yeah.
For those that don't know, the Calgary flood was just this, I wouldn't call it a freak or flash flood, but people kind of anticipated that it may have happened or may happen because of all the rainfall. And then one morning, I guess, the river started rising and flooding, and they eventually gave out an evacuation notice, and then people were just kind of waiting around to see if they'd have to evacuate, what areas were going to be affected, were already affected. And Nick, as you said, there was a hashtag YYC flood that you could follow to get that kind of news, and it would either be official news from like the Calgary police where they're saying, okay, we're now evacuating this area, this area, this area, or people themselves will be saying, oh, we see water coming up over wherever, or they'll say, hey, if anyone needs a place to stay, there's room here or whatever. So, it's just like, just this news source that wasn't official, but there was no real other way to get that type of news that quickly. You'd have to wait for like the news in an hour for it to filter through whoever had to actually report it. So
yeah, and as a sort of background, which I find amusing, I was coming home from work not the day before we were evacuated, but the day before that, and it really started raining hard, and I had like a couple showers in Calgary, and on my way home, like I was just drenched through. Reminds me of how it rains back home. I didn't think it rained here like this ever, and it turns out when it does rain like that, it floods.
Yeah, and I remember like for us, we lived downtown at the time, just in the East Village, and the place is upriver or downriver.
Towards the mountains.
Yeah, so the places further south were getting evacuated. Actually, no, the places further north and further south were getting evacuated, but in our downtown core, it wasn't as high yet. So we were like, okay, well, should we evacuate? Are we going to get evacuated? That kind of thing, because there was no official word yet. So I found out about this Twitter feed, and I actually tweeted to the Calgary police saying, hey, is East Village going to get evacuated? And they replied like within 5 minutes and said, yeah, it's on the list. Head out now while you still can, kind of thing, or while you have that much more time. So it was like how else are you able to do that? Like, you can't call up the police station and say, are you going to be evacuating? And the news obviously didn't have anything yet, but the Twitter account replied to me saying, yeah, it's on the list, get out while you have more time. So I don't know, that was to me that was kind of like, holy cow, this is like crazy, you can do this and this.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah,
it's also a really good way that I've found for people, like, I didn't really have this experience myself, and obviously I wasn't involved in the flood because I wasn't there, but if somebody is stuck and can't get out, or if they're just trying to tell everybody that they're safe, it's sort of like it's a place where you can go to see if somebody is okay, how they're doing. Like, if somebody knew that you were stuck in an apartment or something and there was flood all around you and you couldn't get out or weren't going to be able to get out and they need to be rescued, if somebody can, if a family member can go to your Twitter feed and see that you're saying, oh, I'm stuck, like whatever network is down, I can't communicate with you in any other way, or this website's crashing, what kind of information is going on. It's a place where people can go to see that you're okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was powerful. Go ahead, Nick.
Although that's, for me anyway, that was Facebook during the flood. Like, everyone was asking me over Facebook what was going on. And so, Twitter versus Facebook, it depends on your audience, I guess.
Yeah, and I actually read a story this week, I think, on a guy who was trapped in, I think it was a bookstore. He went in to use their free Wi-Fi, and they closed up while he was in there. And then he tried to get out, and they locked the doors on him. And I guess he tried yanking on the door, and he set the alarm off. So then when the security or police, whoever, called into the store to see what was going on, he's like, oh, so I'm stuck in here. Like, oh yeah, someone will be down. And it was a couple hours and still no one came. So he went to Twitter, he's like, oh, and he tweeted to the Barnes & Noble or whoever account is like, oh, I'm trapped in your bookstore. So they actually sent someone down to let him out.
How does that happen though?
I don't know. I guess he went in right at the right time as they were shutting down, and they probably already checked the upstairs or wherever he was. Then were on their way locking out, and then got stuck.
Seems so strange.
Yeah.
Is there are we South Park fans at all?
No.
I'm familiar with South Park.
And I was just standing here. I got locked in Barnes & Noble. Why can't I get out Barnes & Noble? No?
No. That was funny, though.
Alrighty. Enjoy that, Internet.
So yeah, I mean, in terms of what Nick, you were saying about Twitter versus Facebook and the whole audience thing, that it's important to know this. It's not just Twitter. Twitter is just a really good example, and people tend to have, a higher percentage of people have public profiles on Twitter, and so broadcast, you're literally broadcasting. You're not just saying something to an audience of just your friends. You're saying something to everybody.
And the retweet functionality appears to be far more prolific on Twitter, the ability for news to just explode quickly.
Yeah, and I think the use of hashtags has evolved quite a bit. I even had friends on Facebook saying, oh, because when Facebook introduced hashtags, oh, why do people even use hashtags? They're so pointless, whatever. And it's well, they can actually be useful if there's a specific event or something that you're trying to follow and want a constant stream of, like you said, public profiles as opposed to just your 3 friends that are experiencing something. So I think they serve its own purpose in each way you want to use it.
Yeah, and it's between hashtags and mentions, it's extremely powerful. Because I have a podcast that is Ottawa centric. I have a column on TweetDeck that is a search for Ottawa, the hashtag Ottawa, or just use of the word Ottawa. And so on Wednesday, it proved extremely useful because I already had it set up, but I could have set it up at any point. But it was just there was information constantly pouring in. It wasn't necessarily people I followed, but it was everything that was coming in about Ottawa.
Yeah.
Hashtags. They're a thing. They're useful. Bold stances we take. It's not, and it's good when it's, a useful one, but unless you're but first, let me take a selfie.
The ones where it's after a plane crash, they're trying to get the plane in the background.
Or the guy who took a picture of a burning house behind him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
There are definitely misuses of all of it, and I found it particularly useful again. I happen to follow a lot of journalists, and so there were people that were. I'm going to shift off of Calgary. We can come back to it if there are other stories, but I'm going to shift to Ottawa in my experiences this past week. There were a lot of journalists. Some were trapped in their own buildings, like in the CBC building and the CTV building in Ottawa. Some were trapped. There were a couple of people trapped inside Parliament on lockdown. There were people on the streets just trying to get away or trying to roam around. And it was really powerful being able to see all those perspectives.
Yeah.
And it was all so immediate. I just thought it was really powerful and a good tool for people looking for information.
And it was even useful to a lot of news organizations because they started reporting what was happening on Twitter. Although that's a bit of a double-edged sword because like there were reports on Twitter that there had been a shooting at the Rito Center, and it was later, when they actually went over everything, there was actually no shooting at the Rito Center. That was just widespread speculation on behalf of Twitter users.
I actually have an not an anecdote, but a story about that. It's kind of something that journalists, when you want to have journalistic integrity, you sort of have to vet stories as they come in, because they come in immediately. Anybody can say anything, and so first what you had was people saying there was an attack in the Rito Center, and then the Rito Center came out and said there was no attack here, and then they came out and clarified and said there was an attack near the Rito Center, and then I think that was because there was a photo that showed up that there was an ambulance leaving a hotel that was right next door to Parliament. And the
Chateau Laurier?
Chateau Laurier. And
Chateau Fairmont. Rob.
Fairmont Hotel. What do you... and so there was
It's the Chateau Laurier. It's the historic Chateau Laurier, which was across from the train station, so the diplomats could come from the train through an underground tunnel to the hotel right next to Parliament.
Yeah. Let's move on, because I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry I had to listen to that, Rob. I'm sorry I had to explain that to you.
You didn't, but thank you. So there was a photo that showed up of an ambulance at the hotel, and so I think that's where that speculation came from. But there are all kinds of events. There are all kinds of things going on. So you can't say, like, it's an obvious thing to draw a connection there, even if there isn't one. You see an ambulance, you assume something happened, but it might not have been related. It could have just been a random, someone had a heart attack or someone had something going on at the hotel. It happens all the time. And so there were all these reports, but it's important to take 5 minutes, confirm that something happened, because there were all kinds of things that would be said, but then if within 5 minutes it wasn't taking off in popularity, like, it's pretty safe to say it didn't happen, because there's no confirmation, there was no continuation of the story. It's just someone said something and then it stopped. And anyone want to take that?
I think Mike had the precedence on that one.
Oh, I was just going to mention about, I guess, going on not fake news, but just misleading news or whatever, that I remember during the Calgary flood, there was a very popular viral photo of the Saddle Dome half filled up with water, like up into the stands and whatever. And people were like, oh, look at this flood, like, this is crazy, look how high up it is. And then they all came out and said, no, that's actually not how the Saddle Dome looks right now. They're just, I guess someone, at least the story was that someone created the photo to illustrate if the water was in the Saddle Dome, this is how high up it would be. But the Saddle Dome actually wasn't that filled up with water. They did have another photo circulating with, like, a spotlight shining down into the Saddle Dome because the power was out, obviously, and it was shining on the water, and that there was water in the Saddle Dome. But this other photo, it was like a completely lit Saddle Dome with water just like halfway up the stands, and it's like, well, no, that's not a real photo. But everyone would just retweet it and comment, and it just went around. And yeah, it's kind of have to be careful about what you're seeing and retweeting to see if it's actually confirmed.
Interesting.
Yeah. And on the note of, actually confirmed news and stuff like that, the CBC's coverage through the Ottawa shootings was absolutely excellent. It was not only widely heralded in Canada, but there have been news organizations around the world, or bloggers, whatever, have come out and said this is what reporting during a crisis should look like. It was great. And even paused it about, a few hours into it, saying, okay, so what do we actually know for sure so far? And it was a really good way of, figuring out what had been actually confirmed by government, police organizations, stuff like that, and what was just widespread speculation. And so I feel like that's, like, Twitter can't replace something like the CBC, because the CBC is that actual balanced voice that's like, now hold on just a minute, guys. Let's make sure we're getting it right here.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's also why I love the CBC, and I hope, well, I don't know. I got strong feelings about CTV.
Yeah. Well, even there's a screenshot of the City TV, I guess a Toronto-based media organization, whatever, and their infographic or not infographic, but their, I don't know, whatever title slide or whatever of the event was like terror on Parliament, and it was like this dark sky of like Parliament and like metallicized letters like in bold across like the thing is like super dramatic and alarmist and whatever, and it's like you don't need to do that to give good news, like.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're obviously trying to. The news media in the States has been very successful, not at giving news in a balanced kind of way, but in making money for their advertisers.
Fear-mongering and sensationalizing. Yeah.
So the incentive to do that is there, but you kind of have to step back from it and say, are we doing, this is not what we were hired to do. We were hired to put together something that is informational and not sensational.
Yeah.
I think the CBC did a good job of that. Even when they were reporting, like it's almost impossible to report 100% factual, correct information, especially when you're sitting there for hours at a desk just trying to process new information, come up with what is right, what's wrong. But I think the balance that they hit was a lot closer to 100% than it was to typical news networks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even with like the whole Ebola cases in the States, and I think I saw some reports that they were comparing it to like ISIS, and it's like, oh, the ISIS of disease or something, like, and it's like, why do you even have to sensationalize and fearmonger with that kind of thing? It's like
Yeah.
Not there at all. So, does anyone else have anything to say about Twitter? We'll probably come back to Twitter at some point, but what I want to kind of switch gears and talk about something that happened to me, and I'm not sure if this happened to you guys in Calgary, is that a lot of the cellular networks and Wi-Fi, sometimes Wi-Fi, but like the cellular networks in general for your cell phone went down. And something that happened in Ottawa is that my cell phone didn't have reception, but the cellular networks are fine. It's the fact that they were trying to shut down communication from possible people roaming the streets, like people trying, like other shooters or people that could have been out there. They're trying to jam the network so that the police are the only ones who can communicate. And so a lot of people were saying, oh man, there's so many people trying to call each other and trying to get in touch, and that's why the networks weren't working. But that's not what it was. It was that the police have network jammers that they were employing to cut communications from the people.
That sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah, and so at first I was like, oh man, like everyone's trying to contact loved ones, and that makes sense. But there was no increased, like that does happen. Cell networks do go down, but they go down when there's a lot of people, like more people than normal in one small space, and that didn't happen in this. So that's not the reason the networks went down. They were being jammed by the police, and eventually that news did get around. The police were saying, we're using jammers, like if you can't communicate, it's not the network's down, it's not that anything bad has happened, we're doing this on purpose, just hold out.
Yeah, that actually did happen when was it? I think it was the earthquake in 2010 in Ottawa, which, wasn't a major earthquake or anything, but what was it? Like everyone was trying to text one another, and the networks just couldn't handle it, and they kind of crashed. Although at the time I was with Wind Mobile, and that was one time in which it actually proved invaluable, because nobody was on Wind Mobile. So I just was like, yeah, my phone's working fine. Woo! I actually lent my phone to a couple people so they could call, and yeah.
So everyone should have a backup Wind phone just in case something bad happens to the real networks. Is that what you're saying?
Unless Wind becomes popular, in which case it will once again be useless. Although if it gets popular enough, it might get better. I don't know.
So they didn't jam the data and SMS networks, did they?
They jammed the whole, like, my cell phone went through like full service sometimes, and then it would just drop completely, sometimes to no service. Sometimes the data would just disappear, but it was everything. It was
Okay.
just in the downtown region. Everyone else was not affected by it. But yeah, I definitely thought it was an interesting use, and it's a good idea to cut off the communication, because there are ways around that, but that cuts off. Like, if you're planning to use that to communicate and then it's gone, you don't really have any way to organize.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you tell us about some ways around that, Rob?
Yeah. Say that's a good segue.
Yeah. So there are ways. We'll switch sides to government censorship and protests here, because there's a protest going on in Hong Kong right now that, again, I'm not an expert on it. I don't want to talk about that, but I want to talk about the people that are protesting not having access to internet connections, specifically because the government has turned the networks off, or has mandated that companies running them turn the networks off. And there are applications that have been built in the last year or so, and they're sure there are applications prior to that, but there are applications that use peer-to-peer networking. And so basically, if you're in a group of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people and there's no network, all of those people can still communicate, because if everyone passes the word to download this app, and in this case the app they're using, and the app that I've actually tried out before, is called FireChat, and it basically it will connect anyone that has it and is using it. It'll connect them together via what are called ad hoc networks. So they're networks that are formed as needed. And so messages can spread through a network of phones without there being any cell towers or any Wi-Fi hotspots or any even access points or anything. And so you don't need a network infrastructure. You just need a bunch of devices, and messages can spread. And so they're using that to communicate and to organize, even though the government has shut down the official internet providers. And so yeah, it's, from what I understand, it uses. I don't think it uses Bluetooth necessarily. It might use Bluetooth to quickly pair to establish which devices are on the network, but then it uses Wi-Fi to communicate.
Okay.
Wi-Fi is a lot more. There's Bluetooth Low Energy, which is Bluetooth 4.0, which a lot of new phones come with. It's good for, like, hey, you over there within 30 feet of me, hi, and then, like, so the devices will shake hands and know who each other are. But then Bluetooth uses a lot of power, whereas Wi-Fi uses a lot less, and so they'll use Wi-Fi to actually communicate.
So is that
what's there?
Did we talk about that in our test chat, our microphone test chat, Rob?
Yes. I think
okay. Because I was like reaching out and shaking that he's told me about that before, but when? When? But yeah, like I think I haven't heard about those apps yet, but I think it was during one of the things that happened in Libya in the time since Muammar Gaddafi was ousted. I think they were having a period of civil unrest, and everyone was taking to Twitter to document everything, and like the government then shut Twitter down within that country. And I think FireChat or something like that would prove really invaluable for people that need to communicate.
Yeah. I think that was Turkey, wasn't it?
Oh.
Turkey as well, I believe.
Turkey shut down Twitter. Yeah. It might have been both. Yeah.
There are a lot of countries that have gone out of their way to stop their people communicating in official ways.
Yeah. Well, and Arab Spring was another thing that Twitter just exploded on, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, it's interesting because, barring national governments shutting it down, it's like an absolutely free form of communication that can just be broadcast worldwide. It's like when the internet was first discovered, they were saying that, initiatives towards world peace would pick up a lot of steam. And they said the reason for that would be that you could just have a completely democratic broadcast system. And as shallow and vapid as a lot of Twitter users are criticized for being, I mean, it's proving invaluable for actual useful situations. And I mean, even Facebook to some extent, because I woke up, I think it was Wednesday morning, and I just thought, I'll check Facebook and see if anything is up. And then I saw Dave Bryce's post that there had been a shooting, and the story was on the Globe and Mail. I was like, oh dear, I need to get up and check the news.
Yeah, and I think it definitely works in both sides of the coin as far as uniting people both for a cause for peace, but also causes against peace as well that we've seen and heard about, and probably in a more underground sense versus Twitter and Facebook. But there's definitely social networks and message boards and Reddit subreddits and all that kind of stuff that people will connect with, that shares particular views that may or may not be toward the same goal of world peace.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, theoretically speaking, of course, what's the difference between a revolution and a terrorist organization, right? Although, an interesting note on that is I've heard about, suppressing extremist groups on the internet. And I might be wrong, but I think the government of Canada might be trying to pass a bill similar to this. And I'm going to get briefly political, I apologize. But from what I've heard, police organizations actually don't like suppressing the free speech on the internet, because you'll have these extremist groups or illegal, or groups condoning illegal activities, and they will set up message boards and things like that, or participate on social media. But when you suppress their ability to do so, they tend to go further and further underground. And so it's just a lot easier to catch them if they're speaking openly and publicly than if you're actually suppressing that speech.
Yeah,
makes sense.
That point. It's true.
That's what I've heard anyway.
So another interesting use of this, which we touched on briefly, is natural disasters, like larger scale natural disasters than just a river, which affects a small group of people.
A small group
just
of
a
people.
river?
One city is a small group, or one small area borders a river.
It was all of southern Alberta.
Yeah, Rob, Medicine Hat? Jeez. High River?
Lethbridge, perhaps? I'm not actually sure.
No, I don't think so.
Lethbridge's river valley is so deep. I don't think it affected.
Oh, High River got destroyed.
Yeah.
Like ghost
And
town.
what a shocker. A place named High River flooded.
Jeez.
Lethbridge figured it out. Lethbridge moved out of the coulee like 100 years ago.
The word bridge is right in the name.
Actually, it was named Lethbridge before there was a bridge built, I think, which is funny. But anyway, maybe one day the people of High River will move to higher ground.
Higher River.
Higher River.
Yeah.
Anyway, Rob, as you were saying.
What I'm trying to say is larger scale than just one small community. Something like a large earthquake that's going to affect millions of people, or like it's going to directly affect millions of people, as opposed to pushing people away from a river.
Like the Boxing Day tsunami type
Exactly.
level? Yeah.
Something that affects millions or tens of millions of people directly. And so there's a certain XKCD comic that I think we should at least mention, talking about physical waves from an earthquake radiating out from the center of it, and talking about the speed of the internet in comparison, and people everywhere. I know that whenever there are even small earthquakes here, where I feel like the ground shake a little bit, I go and I check Twitter to see, or I'm like, oh, did anyone else feel that? And often I'm right. And there's a Twitter account, I believe. Oh, I'm gonna look it up. I think it's called Canada Quakes, and so it's the network of geoseismic equipment that is automatically set up to detect any seismic activity above a certain threshold. And so it tweets the location, the nearest city, and the Richter scale measurement of the earthquake. And so you can, like, I've actually felt it, and I go and look on Twitter, and immediately it pops up, yep, 4.2 in Quebec somewhere. It's like, okay, this system works pretty well. And there was a while back where there was a fairly bad earthquake up the coast of BC. And that Twitter account was so busy because there were like 100 aftershocks. And so every 5 minutes it would be like, burn, burn, like clockwork. But it's really cool. Again, a really cool use of technology. It's something that's set up to automatically. There's nobody sitting there typing that out. It just, whenever there's a reading, it automatically goes, okay, let everybody know about it that wants to know. So that was, again, just a super cool use of technology. Do we want to mention this week Facebook's new service during emergencies?
I think it's a fantastic idea.
I'm interested to see. So they have a service. I don't know exactly how it's going to be implemented, but if something bad happens in a location, the app will automatically detect, like, because it's detecting your location anyways, unless you have it set up to not do that. Which, again, let's not get into that whole issue.
Yeah.
People whose Facebook app is set to check their location on an intermittent basis when they open the app, it'll say, oh, I noticed you're in Calgary. In Calgary, there was a flood. Are you okay? Do you want to share the fact that you're okay with your friends? And then everyone can sort of centrally see, yep, I'm okay. And you can also say, oh, these people are also near you. Are they okay? And then you can also confirm that everyone's okay. And so I haven't seen it again. Sorry?
I really would have liked to see that on Wednesday. But
yeah. No. And so what you got instead on Wednesday was a bunch of people saying, I mean, like I did as well, this is going on, there's stuff happening, and I'm fine right now, things are okay, we're in lockdown, whatever. But it would be interesting to have something automatically pop up, because not everybody, again, it's sort of the same thing as the Twitter Firehose thing. Not everybody knows where people are going to post something. I'd say 90% of people don't have a central place where they can say, I'm okay. Everybody I know, you can go here to see if I'm okay during whatever event. And so to have something like that that's publicized on Facebook, where, again, most people in North America have Facebook now, it's a good central way to say, these are the people who have still not been accounted for, these are the people who are okay, and it's, again, really great use of technology to solve this thing that could be pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the communication ends up being complete and utter chaos sometimes, and it would be really nice to have a central location where you could check out something like that. And kudos to Facebook for recognizing that they could perform an actual public service.
Yep.
Absolutely.
But see, then they still get the criticism from others. It's like, oh, you're checking locations, you're using that information, you're tracking where I am. It's like...
so annoying.
I know, don't you hate it when people are concerned about their privacy? Ugh.
Oh, serious.
It is a little bit annoying. Honestly, it is. I just want to point out that apparently Canada has been earthquake-free for the last 9 days. Ooh. The last one was the one in Banff that happened on the 16th. I don't know if you guys heard about that, but I definitely remember hearing about it.
I saw a picture going around. It was like a meme type thing, and it was like, Banff earthquake, we will rebuild, and it was like a tipped over lawn chair. It was funny.
I've seen stuff like that. It's good.
It's funny because I imagine it was 4 kilometers west of Banff, apparently, but it was a magnitude 2.7.
That's nothing.
But it's nothing, but it's in a mountainous region. I imagine it has to be a little bit worse when it's right there on a fault line.
Well,
it's not a fault line.
We have a Richter scale, Rob.
The mountains aren't a fault line, though.
Okay, maybe not a fault in the traditional sense.
It's a compression. It's a compression zone. Yes.
It's a place where is that a totally different thing?
Yes.
Oh, I know it's different, but like it's wrong to call it a fault line.
Yeah, it's because it's not a fault.
It's a plate boundary. Can I say that? Or it used to be a plate boundary.
It's not a plate boundary at all.
It used to be two plates.
No, it's not. No.
Bounded together.
No.
Okay, explain. I'm confused.
The plate boundary's over in BC, and then the compression zone was inner Canada, and that's why the mountains came up.
So the place where a mountain range forms isn't necessarily the boundary. It's just where it was weakest, so that's where it buckled. Okay, that's.
So what's a fault? I actually like that. We're like I'm used to people talking about chemicals or toxins or something like that, and throwing out these chemistry-specific definitions, and me going, well, that's not it at all. You're shooting for like technical language, but you're massacring it right now. And I'm pretty sure that's what just happened. Like Rob was like, "No, this is a thing, and this," and Mike's just like, "No, no,
I know what he was trying to get at. I knew what you're trying to get at, but we don't want to.
And I appreciate that correction because. I think, I knew that there was a fault in BC. I just assumed that there was also one, and that was where it. But I guess it doesn't have to be where it buckled. That would be the weakest point, not necessarily right at the boundary.
Yeah.
So what is a fault?
It's just the boundary between two places that slip one way or another. Oh. And even a fault isn't necessarily a plate boundary. Those are two different things too.
Because I don't think there's a tectonic plate boundary near Ottawa. But there is a fault line that runs through the Carleton campus.
Yeah, and you can have a fault line wherever. You can have faults
in a crack.
Yeah, it's just a crack between two in formation.
Yeah. All right, and I feel like that's another example of a fault that you can find with Carleton.
Thank you. Thanks for rolling that into it.
Anytime.
Geology puns are the best.
You're not even in Ottawa anymore, and you're not even in Eastern Canada, and you're still hitting on Carleton.
GG forever.
Let's move on to maybe one of the last things we're going to cover in the actual show. Nick, you raised this point to me, and I think that it's interesting, and I think that we should at least mention it. The keep calm and carry on saying, and how in popular culture today it
is brutalized and I hate it.
It's not relevant at all, but this past Wednesday it actually was relevant, and maybe you could explain a bit why it's bad and why yet on this week it was good or could be used positively.
Yeah, I am firmly of the opinion that what Ottawa needs to do right now is to keep calm and carry on. And the Keep Calm, Carry On campaign was it was started during, or at least a little before, the Blitz in London, England, the fun London, not the London I lived in. But yeah, so German bombs were falling on London the entire time. And it was just a really bad situation. But what they were asking people to do was to keep calm and carry on in the face of this, horrible war, frequent disasters kind of thing.
Well, and the constant fear.
Yeah. And what they needed to do was not just give in to the fear and just, let Germany take their island. But what they had to do was, keep the economic engine of the country going, keep all the means of production going. And they did that, and it was great. But that's what keep calm and carry on is for. So, in the face of the Ottawa shootings, it's not going to do anybody any good to just sit and cower in fear constantly after a horrible, horrible massacre. Mm-hmm. But what we have to do is keep calm, carry on, cling to the values that make us Canadian and move forward on that basis and not, give in to fear-mongering and stuff like that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was going to say, there's a similar campaign or saying, I guess, during the Calgary flood, and Nick, I'm sure you remember the Come Hell or High Water campaign. Yeah. And the whole thing with, the flood was a week or two, at least 2 weeks before the Stampede.
Mm-hmm.
And people were wondering if we were going to even have the Stampede now, because the whole Stampede grounds got trashed. And, it would have been a huge economic hit for Calgary if we didn't have the Stampede. And, their whole thing was, well, no, come hell or high water, we're going to have a Stampede. And it was not only for an economic purpose, but also just for an emotional, spirit-lifting purpose of like, well, we're not going to let this flood stop us from having our annual party kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's kind of cool to see us come up with that type of thing to unite around, I guess.
Go Nenshi, right?
Yeah.
I still have my Come Hell or High Water T-shirt.
Yeah.
It's not
and
even
nobody
so
in Ontario
much,
gets it, which is terrible.
It's not even so much the fact that you want to have a party. It's a celebration of culture, Western culture.
Well, not so much Western anymore, but yeah.
It still is.
I guess in aspects, but
cowboy hats and boots and horses and agriculture and rodeo.
People don't go for that.
Still
yeah, people don't go for that though, but
people don't go for that. Maybe not younger people, but
I go for the deep fried food myself.
Again, great Western.
Have you had deep fried Oreos? Oh,
yes, at the Stampede. But speaking of getting back to normal, I thought last night Montreal, the Alouettes, and the Ottawa Red Blacks played. And I don't know if any of you watched the pregame ceremony or happened to be or hear anything about it, but they obviously had a great military showing on the sidelines and in the stands. But Stephen Harper went, and they had a field-spanning Canadian flag, and they had a bunch of people holding it. But right before they did the speech and a moment of silence and the anthem. But normally, when you watch a football game, the teams stand on their respective benches, and there are two separate teams that are getting ready to fight each other. And last night, and not that this is uncommon, but I thought it was really important and a good showing of strength, was that during this entire process, both teams intermingled the entire length of the sideline. Like they not alternated, but they stood together. And when they were singing the anthem, they all went and held up the flag as well. I just thought it was such a beautiful showing of how Canada stays together, and it was really great to see.
Yeah. So it's for reasons like that then when I see things like keep calm, Gangnam Style, or keep calm and the Doctor, I'm like, oh.
Yeah. This is why we can't have nice things, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's even I don't know if you guys heard about for the was it Pittsburgh, Boston?
No, Pittsburgh Flyers or Penguins Flyers.
Penguins and Flyers, yeah. They did a O Canada rendition and had a projection of the Canadian flag, I think, on the ice.
They did.
And then it's that kind of stuff that it's like we're not alone in this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And then just going off of the political aspect with the pre-football game thing. Like when I went to the Stamps game on Labor Day this year, they did a little kind of pre-game, like similar to an NFL type thing where they have the flag and they do the anthem and the fighter jets. They did that for the Stamps game, and it was cool because I guess like in Canada you're not used to the ultra patriotism that the U.S. has. But I think that element added to a sporting event where everyone's there to kind of see the game and all together, and you kind of have that moment of patriotism is kind of cool and adds a lot to it, I think.
I don't want to say that we're trying to be better than anybody else, but I think American patriotism is different than Canadian patriotism, and Canadian. I'm going to say
definitely correct.
I'm going to say it's better, but I'm not saying it's objectively better. I just think that
different.
American patriotism is like we're better than everybody else. But what Canadian patriotism was in these demonstrations was we are one, we are together, we believe in our freedoms, and that is great. Not we're great, just that we are one.
I'm not sure I agree wholly, but
what do you think? What is?
I don't necessarily think they're shooting for, what is it? There's an actual American exceptionalism. I don't think they're shooting for exceptionalism so much. But
really? I don't think they're shooting for exceptionalism. I think they're thinking that they've achieved it. The fact that Team America World Police is a movie is like.
But that was a satirical examination of Bush-era foreign policy.
That's what I mean. The fact that that satire has to exist is why that sort of exceptional patriotism is so misguided, I guess. It would be the best word.
This is a whole other topic for discussion.
It is.
This is like after show worthy, or potentially like future chat politics.
How about we'll end it and then we'll do a bit of politics off the cuff.
Okay. Can we still talk about my boxers in the after show? Because I really like this story.
That'll give people incentive to listen to the after show, I hope.
Yeah. Would you like to hear about my undergarments? Tune in, ladies and gentlemen.
So, as usual, guys, thanks for being here. People who are listening and or watching, we would love to have you follow us on or subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Google Plus or on Twitter. We're at Future Chats, or search for us on Facebook. If you do that kind of thing, although Facebook is horrible again. You can find us on iTunes. You can find us on Stitcher Radio. And I guess that's it.
All right.
Anything else you guys want to add before we say temporarily goodbye? Nope.
I'll briefly say that a couple of years ago they examined the constitutions of all the newer democracies, and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is one of the most copied ideals in constitutional language nowadays.
Wow, that's good to hear, because it for a very, well, maybe not a very long time, but for a long time it used to be the British one.
Well, we're kind of an offshoot of the British, probably. So.
Right, but apparently that's
after show, guys. After show.
What I want to say, no, before we go into after show, I just want to say one more thing on British, or not British politics, American politics. Maybe you guys can mute, and then I'll just go straight into the end.
Britain doesn't have a constitution, Rob. Are you referring to the British North America Act, which was our original constitution?
I'm talking about the American, how America got the constitution it has now.
Yeah.
They adapted things that were written about in Britain and were common law in Britain, and adapted them for their own needs. Like, there's a whole thing, like, you can read about it. There's a whole thing about gun laws in Britain and gun policy in Britain and the right to bear arms, and how that was misappropriated by the U.S. in such a way that now it's ambiguous as to what they meant by right to bear arms. And so that what was written down in Britain and what's written down in the U.S. is different, and it's different in important ways that mean that now people in America think they have a right to guns, when that wasn't necessarily, like, everybody has a right to guns, and that wasn't necessarily the intention of what was written down. That's all I was trying to say.
Yeah, that's correct.
I'll put a link to the stuff I wrote about it like a couple years ago. But...
All right.
All right.
Bye.
So, mute it up. Bye, guys.
Toodaloo.
Thanks for tuning in on another episode of Future Chat. We really enjoyed having you here, and we look forward to seeing you next week for Future Sci Chat. Bye, everybody. All right.
Okay.
Your politics chat.
So there's this one day, and my cousin sends me a message. He had an old beater truck this summer, and he spent most of his summer, like, fixing it up. Mm-hmm. And one day he messages me and says, "Hey, do you mind just taking a look at this? Because we're having a heck of a time." Rob, where'd you go?
You're still the title card.
I can see that.
Okay. So he messages me, like asks if I can come over and like just take a look at this thing, and I was like, do I have to put on pants? And he's like, no, don't worry about it. And so I was wearing these boxers that I almost wore to Future Chat. It's got Homer Simpson and pie, and he's saying, pie. Hey, Rob.
You got your lower third back.
I'm aware.
Nice. So he shows up, and his mom was babysitting this kid for most of this one summer. Great kid. And he was like, maybe 4 or so. So, about that age. But he hops out of the car, and I look at my cousin, I'm like, so I'm putting pants on, am I? He's like, yeah, sorry about that. And the kid was like, just like, put on this most scrutinizing face, like, why are you wearing those shorts? It's like, well, these are the shorts I wear around the house. It's like, why do they have Homer Sim on them? It's like, well, you see, he's saying he likes pie, and I like pie, so I like these shorts. He's like, okay, and like walks off, just completely unsatisfied with the situation.
Not realizing you're not actually wearing pants.
I think he realized that they weren't like proper pants or proper trousers, if you're into that nomenclature. But it was just, I don't know. Kids are fun.
Didn't trousers originally mean underwear?
No, pants originally underwear in England.
Oh, that's what it was. Yeah, you're right.
So sorry, they were actually pants by that definition.
That kid is smart.
Yeah, no, that funny kid.
Is there anything people actually want to say on politics in this?
I don't know, like,
I think
I'm not exactly sure what you were going for.
I think I kind of know what you mean. Like, as far as American patriotism is like, guns, we're keeping those Mexicans out, like that kind of thing. Whereas, I think, Canadian isn't like, we're not saying our ideals are better than anyone else's. It's like, we're united as a country, and we're proud of, like you said, the freedoms and the values we have, but it's not like elitism.
Right. I think I'm going to try to put this eloquently. I have it wrapped up in my brain. Hopefully by describing that it's wrapped up in my brain, I haven't lost my train of thought. But,
paint us a picture, Rob. Paint us a word picture.
So American patriotism is everyone who is an American is awesome for this, and this reason, and we don't need or want anyone else to be an American. Like, the people that already are Americans are awesome. Like, there are a lot of Americans, not maybe a lot, but enough Americans that absolutely do not want immigration of any kind. They don't want new Americans. They like the current people who are Americans, and that's really great. And America's great, and everything that they currently espouse is great. Whereas Canadians, I think a lot of Canadians would be very happy to accept anyone around the world who espouses Canadian values and freedoms, and would even go so far, I know I would, as to say that anyone that holds dear the same positive values and ideals and freedoms that I hold dear, I would be willing to already call them a Canadian. I would say, if there's a guy in, I don't know, Hungary who wants to come to Canada and gives reasons that are positive and has good values and all of these things that Canadians hold dear, I would be like, yeah, it doesn't, like, that's good. He's a citizen. If he can pass our citizenship test, you don't need any red tape. He can be a Canadian. He can come to Canada.
I think you're painting with very broad strokes there.
Well, you have to with politics.
Yeah, absolutely. Politics are complicated. You say one thing and that's it, and that's how it goes. No, but seriously though, like, there are Americans who espouse that, but when we say Americans,
of course there are.
You and I and Mike also are Americans.
North Americans.
You're and like to the same extent that Argentinians are Americans because we live in the Americas.
Yeah.
But so when you're saying Americans, I believe you're referring to citizens of the United States of America.
Thank you for clarifying that one.
So
People
and the
might
other
not
thing,
confused, jeez.
yeah, people would think Mexicans are trying to keep Mexicans out of Mexico, and what sense does that make? No, but like my point is, there are Americans that espouse that
Of course there are.
they want to shut down immigration. There are a ton of Americans who are probably in a silent majority who are fine with immigration. And they're having lived in Belleville for a while, I can tell you there are a lot of Canadians that do not want more immigrants.
Absolutely.
Look at like Redneck Alberta. Redneck Alberta is the exact same way.
Yeah, like it is, and I mean the original. When you're talking about if there's someone who espouses our values, we're happy to call them us already. That's the original. That's how they were setting up America, at least according to the mythology. That it didn't matter who you are, where you were from. They wanted a meritocracy where immigrants could come from around the world and achieve their dreams, and that's why the Statue of Liberty says, "Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free."
Yeah. Unless you're Irish in the 20s, whenever it was, like there was a certain point that it didn't change, but the majority view, or at least the loud view, switched away from that and went to, who are these people coming? Like, I don't know these people. What if they're bad people? And it became fear.
That's true. And I mean, let's get political here, guys. I'm opposed to immigration when people come to Canada and they don't like the ideals of Canada and they want to change Canada. And I'm like, well, if you don't like how it's set up, why would you come?
Yeah.
Because there are people like that, and that's the kind of stuff I object to. But
there are people like that.
It's okay to change too, if it's changed for the better. Like there's a lot of things about Canada, like Canadian leadership or governings that I'd want to change.
Right.
Like, so I think like you need people who want change, because that's the whole point of politics and government, is to have choice in how things are done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of unfortunate that each of us can in turn in a circle, like go grander and grander scale and be like, well, if you go even bigger, it's like, and then eventually you get to a point where we're just talking about the entire world, and it's like, we should make the world a better place, and be like, yeah, but that's so complicated. We'll just, like, that's politics, is you just keep getting bigger and grander until you're like, oh man, that seems like a lot of work.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, like, so long as you're down with most of the Constitution, I guess, because there are some constitutional amendments that'll allow to change, but
you almost need to have a system in place in the founding of a country that has a built-in, this doesn't last forever, check it again in 50 years, check it again in 100 years.
Well, we do have that. It's the system of constitutional amendments.
No, I know, but people. I'll say especially in the States, but what I mean is there are people in the United States who believe this. Not everybody, but people. If it's written in the Constitution, this Constitution written by flawed people, based on stuff written by other flawed people earlier, they hold that as though it is the meaning of life is these things that are written on this document, like the right to bear arms, when it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's open to interpretation.
Yeah,
well, come on, Rob. Do you want the King of England to just show up and start pushing you around? Well, I mean, that's a poor example, because the Queen could show up and start pushing us around according to our Constitution, but I digress.
That's a perfect example right there.
No, but if she did, we would suddenly go, whoa, nope.
Yeah. Well, see,
that's a sort of détente kind of
How
thing.
are we going to do that, Rob? Our armed forces swear allegiance to the Queen.
It's very similar to it's similar to like, and I guess you're opening a whole other can of worms with like, religious text interpretation, right? How everything was written for its time and was relevant to its time in the spirit of the ideals that people had at that time. So you can't, in context. So you can't look back at something written 150, 200, 1,000 years ago, apply it exactly as it's written today, and hold that as the same weight that it had back then. Like with the significance of the Queen, or like you said, the right to bear arms, or any of that kind of stuff, right? Even this thing, what was the thing I read the other day about, was it Nick or Rob that posted about the thing with like the beer laws in Ontario or Ottawa?
I'm going to blog about that. I am so upset with the state of beer laws in Ontario.
Yeah, like alcohol prohibition laws were like way back when, but there's still laws that are in the legal documents that hold valid today, which they shouldn't.
There is a rule on the Ontario alcohol law books. I don't know what they're called or where they are. It says that unless you are a brewery of a certain size, you are not allowed to operate more than one restaurant that sells your beer.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, that's
maybe that was me. That's so annoying.
Yeah.
There's a restaurant now that wants to open a second location, but they can't because they also brew beer, and they don't brew enough beer to qualify for the second restaurant.
Yeah,
it's the dumbest thing of life. I can't believe the state of Ontario liquor laws. And no, sorry, not liquor laws, beer laws.
Yeah.
Anything under 10%.
It's crazy.
But interesting note, went to see the Book of Mormon last Sunday. Fabulous play. Keep in mind, it's written by Trey Parker and Matt Stone, who also write South Park and Team America, so that is the level of vernacular that you should expect out of this, but absolutely a great message at the end of it all. More to do with the grander point of, literalism within, or biblical literalism, which I took a religion class, and apparently biblical literalism is only like 100 years old or so as a concept.
It doesn't surprise me.
Like, for a couple thousand years, people were like, oh yeah, well, you read it with context. But then 1900 rolled around, and people were like, no, it is written like this, and so you do this and this and this. And that is how the world works.
Yeah.
And ignore those other parts because they don't matter, but only certain things matter.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what is a church other than a group of people that have their values or project their values upon a text? That's why you have so many Christian churches.
Yeah, like I think it was more the rise of more liberal interpretations or modifications of religious ideals that they're like, no, we need to stick to the text. When it came to interpreting it in a Catholic versus Anglican versus Presbyterian versus Baptist sense, no one cared because they were all fairly aligned in the general spirit of the writing. But then once you start going into, like same-sex marriage or smoking marijuana or any of that kind of stuff, then it's we can say, well, the Bible either doesn't say anything about it, or that was old times about talk about slavery or any of that kind of stuff, so it doesn't apply today. And then that's like, no, we need to stick to the text, and that's kind of what people turn to when you start expanding the interpretation to a more differing interpretation, I guess.
Well, and I mean, when you're talking about that, like Old Testament, Leviticus especially, wow, does he have a lot to say about a lot of different things. Yeah.
I think it's interesting and sometimes funny how when something new will come up, something that couldn't have been predicted in any biblical texts, like Twitter, for instance, if we go back to social media, people will try to interpret passages in religious texts that could apply to social networks or social media and either try to say this is a great thing or this is a terrible thing based on interpretations that couldn't possibly have considered a social network because it was written thousands of years ago.
And like you're a religious text as a guide for your moral compass, and that's, I don't know, it seems perfectly reasonable that a religious person would consult religious texts to decide what to think about things.
Right, but I think, at least in my opinion, that some people try to apply it too broadly. They'll make a stretch or
according to your morals and your values.
All right. I'm pretty sure my morals are fine.
Moral relativism, Rob.
It's more like the further you get or the more advanced you get from when any text, religious or not, was written, it becomes less and less applicable and relevant at that time. So you need to start stretching the interpretation of it to apply to whatever you're trying to deal with.
You guys, you need to watch the Book of Mormon because this is like the whole point of the whole play. You gotta watch it. It's amazing.
I'll eventually. Well, I haven't seen it. Julia saw it, and she really enjoyed it. Was a bit shocked, but yeah, I think that's the point.
Who was
that's their point.
Who was the actor that was doing the New York, the Broadway one? Wasn't that Daniel Radcliffe?
No, there was a guy, Andrew Reynolds, and Josh Gad was in it as well.
I thought there was like a more mainstream movie star that was in it.
Andrew Reynolds is his name. He was also in Girls.
That's not who I'm thinking of.
I think my most favorite part of the whole thing is when Jesus calls someone a dick. Also the scary Mormon hell dream.
You probably could call someone that today. With in today's
I think you absolutely could.
Yeah.
This is a great play. Just fantastic.
Can I also point out, just on going back to Book of Mormon for a minute, just because I've never said this on the record, the guy who worked with Matt Stone and Trey Parker to write the songs and music for Book of Mormon was also the guy that won the Grammy and has an EGOT for Frozen, in part for Frozen.
Yeah, well, he also helped write Avenue Q, I think, which is another one of my favorite plays ever, or musicals.
To think that the creative power behind the Book of Mormon and Frozen were the same guy, part the same guy, is just great to me.
It's really good songwriting all across the board.
It's fantastic. Yeah, the two main guys are Josh Gad and Andrew Reynolds.
Okay.
Do we have anything else we want to say?
Dear Americans, please don't stop watching.
No, but that's the thing, is that we're I don't even want to say we're railing, but we're talking about Americans who don't espouse the values that we're talking about. The decent Americans are great and they're awesome.
Keep watching, decent Americans.
There are so many of them. I don't think anyone.
Other guys, you can go eat an apple or something.
Go seed an apple tree.
Eat a bag of apples.
All right. Are we done for the week?
I think
Probably.
so.
Any thoughts on a chat topic for next week? I'll propose mine, and you guys can let me know what you think. So next week is going to be November 1st, which is the day after Halloween.
Okay.
What do you guys think about doing something to do with... I like the debunking thing we've been doing.
Yeah, like the supernatural type stuff.
Supernatural, paranormal, whatever word you want to use. What do you guys think of talking about stuff like ghosts or ESP or...
Yeah, that'd be cool. And like you could talk about like ghost hunting technology.
Yeah, things like Bigfoot, even if we really wanted to go that far.
Are you saying Bigfoot isn't real?
I am.
Technically, we just haven't found.
I'm not sure I want to be a part of this chat anymore, guys. Jeez.
Ghosts are real.
Shoot down everything I believe in.
From a scientific standpoint, you can't actually say Bigfoot isn't real.
We're going to talk about this next week, and we're going to talk about how that is technically true.
Just the evidence is not in his favor.
The evidence is
lack
not...
thereof. Lack thereof, anyway.
And all evidence...
So, Mike,
Sorry?
Mike is taking the Sasquatch agnosticism approach,
Yeah.
I believe.
Exactly.
Evidence for these Yeti or Sasquatch, all the evidence for it is either proven hoax or like a part of a movie set.
Yeah.
So we'll.
Anyway, that's a preview to next week.
Yeah. All right.
Oh boy.
We'll see you guys next week.
See ya.
All right. See
Bye.
you later.